1908. In Red Willow County, Texas, a black cowboy named Isaiah Booker became the most feared man white America refused to name. After 30 members of the Ku Klux Klan were found dead within 24 hours, their bodies burned together in a single pile outside town. The sheriff called it disorder. The judge called it coincidence. The men who wore white hoods called it impossible. Just one morning earlier, those same men had gathered openly, lawmen, preachers, cattle barons, confident their robes made them untouchable and their violence invisible. By nightfall, their homes stood unlocked, their horses riderless, their names suddenly spoken in whispers. No witnesses came forward. No confessions were needed. What happened in those hours was never recorded, only the result. And the question that haunted the county wasn't who did it, but why none of them saw it coming. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn crept over Red Willow County like a hesitant witness. The Texas sun, still low and gentle, cast long shadows across the drought-hardened earth. Isaiah Ash Booker guided his horse along the fence line, checking for breaks after the night's inspection of his cattle herd. The morning air held that familiar stillness, the kind that usually brought peace to a man's thoughts, until he saw the cottonwood tree. At first, it was just a dark shape against the brightening sky. Then details emerged, sharp and cruel in the growing light. A body swaying slightly in the morning breeze, white cloth strips fluttering from the branches like mocking flags. Isaiah's horse sensed his tension, shifting beneath him. He dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate and controlled. His nephew Eli's work boots were still on his feet, caked with the red dirt from yesterday's labor. The boy was only 16. The rope around Eli's neck was new, the fibers still bright. Isaiah noticed everything: the precise knot, the careful height that ensured a slow death, the boot prints in the dirt below. These weren't the marks of chaos. This was methodology. Hoofbeats approached from town. Sheriff Calvin Rourke arrived with the unhurried pace of a man already certain of his conclusions. 2 deputies flanked him, their eyes everywhere except on the body. "Mighty unfortunate business," Rourke said, barely glancing up at Eli. He scratched notes in a small notebook, his handwriting as non-committal as his tone. "Looks like the work of unknown parties. Hard to trace these night raids." Isaiah remained silent, watching how Rourke avoided examining the boot prints, watching how the deputies kept their hands near their guns, watching the growing crowd of townspeople who gathered at a safe distance, their faces blank with the particular emptiness that comes from choosing not to see. A burned match lay in the dirt near the tree's base. Isaiah noted the distinct cross symbol stamped on its head, the mark of the local clan's preferred brand. Rourke stepped over it without comment. "We'll make inquiries," the sheriff said, closing his notebook with finality. "Best cut him down before the sun gets too high." The crowd parted as Reverend Thomas Hale approached, Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. The preacher's soft voice carried just far enough to be heard. "A tragedy. We must pray for understanding in these difficult times." Isaiah met Hale's gaze. The preacher looked away first, turning to comfort the white onlookers who needed absolution more than justice. No one offered to help as Isaiah retrieved his nephew's body. He worked methodically, noting each detail. The rope burns on Eli's wrists, showing he'd been bound before being hanged. The bruises indicating multiple attackers. The careful placement of the clan's cloth strips where they'd be most visible from the road. The sun climbed higher as Isaiah wrapped Eli in a blanket from his saddle. Some of the townspeople drifted away, having seen enough to fuel whispered conversations behind closed doors. Others lingered, perhaps waiting for some display of grief or rage they could later recount with disapproving clucks of their tongues. Isaiah gave them nothing but silence and precision. He led his horse with Eli's body across his saddle, walking the long way back to Booker Land. The crowd thinned and disappeared, returning to their morning routines. By noon, the only sign of the lynching was the empty rope still hanging from the cottonwood. The earth was hard, but Isaiah dug deep. Eli deserved that much. The sun was setting by the time he placed the last stone on the grave, marking it proper despite knowing no white authority would ever acknowledge it as a real burial. In the fading light, Isaiah sat beside the fresh-turned earth. He removed a small leather ledger from his vest pocket, its cover worn smooth from years of tracking cattle counts and grazing records. With the same careful precision he'd shown all day, he opened to the first blank page. The pencil moved steadily across the paper. One name, then another. No emotion colored his writing, just the same meticulous attention he gave to his ranching books. Just facts being recorded. Just accounts being opened. The last light faded from the sky, and still Isaiah wrote, each name as clear as the boot prints had been in the morning dust. The moon hung thin and sharp as Isaiah rode into town, keeping to the shadows of cottonwoods and storage sheds. His years as a buffalo soldier had taught him the value of patience, of watching before acting. He tied his horse behind the livery stable and moved on foot, counting the lit windows, noting which buildings still held life at this hour. 3 lanterns burned in the church basement. 2 more flickered in the back room of Fuller's saloon. A single light marked Deputy Pike's office, where the man's silhouette paced nervously behind thin curtains. Isaiah positioned himself beneath the saloon's back window, letting the voices drift down. "Crow wants everyone there tonight," a man whispered. "Says we got to show strength after this morning's business." "Midnight sharp," another replied. "White Oak Grove." Isaiah recognized the second voice, Tom Fuller himself, who'd refused to serve Eli water just last week. The first belonged to the blacksmith, whose boot prints Isaiah had memorized from the hanging scene. He moved through town like a shadow, gathering fragments of conversation. Behind the general store, 2 men discussed meeting signals. Near the stables, a group traded passwords. Each detail Isaiah recorded in his ledger, matching voices to the faces he'd watched that morning. Just before midnight, he followed the subtle stream of men heading toward White Oak Grove. They moved in 1s and 2s, trying to be discreet, but betraying themselves through shared purpose. Isaiah knew their type. Men who believed secrecy made them powerful, rather than predictable. The clan gathered in a clearing, white robes ghostly in the darkness. Isaiah counted 32 figures as they formed their circle. From his position in the dense brush, he could make out Silas Crow's commanding presence even beneath the hood. The cattle baron stood taller than the rest, his voice carrying with the authority of wealth. "Brothers," Crow intoned, "we've sent our message. Now we must stand ready. There's good grazing land that needs proper ownership, and the railroad's coming. We can't let sentiment or weakness interfere with progress." Deputy Pike shifted uncomfortably at these words, his robe too short for his lanky frame. Isaiah added another mark in his ledger. The meeting dispersed around 1 o'clock, the men splitting into smaller groups. Isaiah had already chosen his first target, the blacksmith, James Whitaker, who lived alone behind his shop. The man's own hammer, left carelessly by the forge, made the work quick and silent. Isaiah moved methodically through the night, Tom Fuller closing his saloon, 2 ranch hands who'd bragged too loudly about their role in the lynching, a banker who'd helped organize the night riders. Each body he transported to a dry ravine north of town, marking names in his ledger as he went. The church bells tolled 2 a.m. as Isaiah caught Deputy Pike slipping out of the sheriff's office. The lawman's neck snapped easily, his body added to the growing collection. By 3, 4 more clansmen had joined their brothers in the ravine. Isaiah worked without haste or emotion, remembering his cavalry training. Control your breathing. Move with purpose. Leave no witnesses. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, but he never rushed. Precision mattered more than speed. Near 4 a.m., he found 3 Klansmen still drinking behind Fuller's saloon, celebrating their message. Their celebration ended quietly. Isaiah dragged them one by one to his horse, the animal steady and calm like its master. The sky began to lighten as Isaiah crossed off the 12th name in his ledger. He could hear the first stirrings of the town, the baker starting his ovens, a rooster announcing dawn, horses nickering for their morning feed, normal sounds from people who didn't yet know their world had shifted. Isaiah made his way to the river, kneeling at its edge to wash the night's work from his hands. The water ran red briefly, then clear. He dried his hands carefully on his shirt, checked his ledger one final time, and mounted his horse. The sun crept over the horizon as he rode toward the ravine, his shadow stretching long across the morning grass. There was more work to be done before the town fully woke. The names in his ledger weren't yet complete, and daylight brought its own opportunities for justice. His horse's hooves made no sound on the soft earth as they followed the familiar trail. The morning air carried the metallic scent of blood and the weight of unfinished business. Isaiah rode steadily, his face as impassive as it had been at Eli's grave. The day was just beginning. The mid-morning sun beat down as Isaiah approached Judge Finch's estate on the outskirts of town. Unlike the night's swift executions, these daylight hours required different tactics. He'd watched the judge's habits for months, how the man took tea on his veranda at precisely 10 o'clock, attended by his housekeeper. Today, the veranda stood empty. Word had spread faster than Isaiah anticipated. He dismounted, noting fresh wagon tracks leading away from the property. The judge had fled, leaving behind half-packed belongings and a still warm tea service. In his study, Isaiah found letters linking the judge to Klan leadership, carefully worded directives about maintaining order and protecting property values. He added the documents to his ledger. At the church, Reverend Hale was less fortunate. Isaiah found him in his office, penning a sermon about peace and forbearance. The preacher's hands shook as he looked up. "I never touched anyone," Hale whispered. "I only spoke God's word." "You blessed their ropes," Isaiah replied quietly. The office door closed with a soft click. By noon, rumors churned through town like dust devils. Men missing from their breakfast tables. Horses found riderless. Sheriff Rourke organized search parties, but Isaiah noticed how carefully he avoided certain properties, those belonging to prominent citizens whose names filled Isaiah's ledger. "Stay clear of the North Ravine," Rourke told his deputies. "Nothing out there but rattlers this time of year." Isaiah worked methodically through the afternoon heat. A banker who'd foreclosed on black-owned farms after suspicious fires. A shopkeeper who'd supplied the Klan with meeting space and alibis. The railroad agent who'd marked certain properties for special consideration. Each death was quick, each body added to his growing collection. He commandeered wagons from Klan members' properties, using their own horses to transport their dead. The animals seemed calmer than usual, as if sensing justice in their labor. By 4 o'clock, 30 bodies lay in a clearing far from town, the same number of lash marks found on Eli's back. Isaiah arranged them with military precision, stripped of their masks and robes. These men had hidden behind symbols. They would burn as themselves. He used their own torches, their own kerosene, their own matches with their damning symbols. The fire caught quickly in the dry afternoon air. Smoke rose in a thick column, visible for miles. In town, people watched it curl against the darkening sky, but none rode out to investigate. Sheriff Rourke kept to his office, blinds drawn. The remaining deputies found urgent business elsewhere. Isaiah stood witness as the flames did their work. No prayers were spoken, no ceremony observed. This wasn't about ritual or revenge, it was consequence, plain and simple. The smoke carried no victory, only finality. As dusk settled, he noticed a change in town. Black children played openly in their yards. Women walked to the store without hurrying. Men gathered on porches, speaking in normal voices rather than whispers. Fear had changed hands. Mrs. Johnson, who'd lost 2 sons to accidents, straightened her washing line without glancing over her shoulder. Old Man Peters actually sat in Fuller's saloon, ordering a drink that was served without comment. Small acts that felt like miracles. The setting sun painted the sky the color of healing bruises as Isaiah rode home. His muscles ached from the day's work. The ledger in his pocket felt heavier than its pages should allow, but it was done. The poison had been cut out, root and branch. His cabin stood dark against the purple evening. Isaiah lit his lamp, noticing how steady his hands remained even after everything they'd done. That's when he saw it. A letter on his table, placed carefully in the center. The postmark showed it had traveled from well outside the county. The clock on his mantel struck 9 as he broke the seal. The paper was expensive, the kind used in city offices. Isaiah unfolded it with the same deliberate calm he'd maintained throughout the past 24 hours. The lamplight flickered across the expensive paper as Isaiah read, "Your efficiency in addressing local corrections has been noted. However, the order's reach extends far beyond your county lines. Consider carefully whether you wish to draw further attention from those above." Some fires spread beyond control. The letter was unsigned, but the paper bore a watermark from a Memphis printing house. Isaiah studied the careful penmanship, noting how certain phrases echoed language he'd seen in Judge Finch's correspondence. Names were suggested through careful references: a senator's banking interests, a governor's railroad investments, a state representative's timber holdings. He placed the letter in his ledger as the night passed slowly. Sleep didn't come. Instead, he cleaned his weapons and watched the stars wheel overhead until dawn painted the sky in shades of iron. Red Willow stirred differently that morning. Isaiah rode down Main Street, noting closed shutters on white-owned businesses. The general store's windows remained dark, Fuller's saloon silent, but black residents moved with cautious purpose. Mrs. Turner swept her storefront without constantly glancing over her shoulder, and John Freeman's children walked to school together instead of being escorted. At the colored church, Sarah Booker stood waiting. His sister's face carried the weight of Eli's absence, but her spine remained straight as prairie grass. She fell into step beside Isaiah's horse. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "What's done is done, but they won't let it rest." "Can't run," Isaiah replied. "This goes deeper than hate." Sarah nodded. "Railroad men in town yesterday, talking about progress and opportunity. Same words they used in Kansas before black farmers lost their land." They stopped at the edge of town where survey stakes marked new railroad lines. Fresh turned earth showed where samples had been taken, property boundaries measured. "Eli caught them mapping our grazing land," Sarah said. "Week before he died. Said they didn't like him asking questions." Isaiah remembered his nephew's curiosity, his habit of noticing detail. "Who's leading the survey?" "James Calder. Arrived from Chicago last month. Keeps office hours at the hotel." Isaiah found Calder exactly where expected, the hotel's private dining room, sharing coffee with 3 white landowners. Through the window, Isaiah watched their animated discussion over maps and documents. Calder's suit was Eastern cut, his manner polished as he pointed out proposed routes and development zones. The landowners nodded eagerly, but Isaiah recognized the predatory gleam in Calder's eyes. He'd seen it before. Men who wielded progress like a weapon, who saw people as obstacles to be cleared rather than lives to be considered. By afternoon, Isaiah had pieced together the pattern. The railroad wanted a straight shot through prime grazing land that happened to belong to black ranchers who'd homesteaded after the war. Eli's death wasn't random terror. It was strategic displacement. "They're using the Klan like a tool," Isaiah told Sarah as evening approached. "Terror makes people sell cheap, makes them run. All the more reason for you to go, she insisted. But Isaiah was already planning. He rode to Jacob Freeman's ranch as sunset painted the hills gold. Freeman had served with him in the 10th Cavalry. They shared the same memories of discipline under fire. Need to organize protection, Isaiah explained. Not revenge. Defense. Freeman nodded slowly. Got 6 men who can ride. Good shots, steady hands. Train them quiet. No uniforms, no patrols. Just readiness. They worked out signals, lantern patterns, fence posts tilted specific ways to call for help without drawing attention. By nightfall, Freeman had sent word to other trusted ranchers. Not everyone would fight, but everyone would watch. Isaiah rode home under a rising moon, mind working through logistics. They'd need ammunition, spare horses, medical supplies, safe houses, and escape routes. The same tactical planning he'd used as a Buffalo soldier, but adapted for civilian defense. The letter from Memphis lay heavy in his pocket. The order might be bigger than Red Willow County, but Isaiah understood something they didn't. Terror only worked when people stayed isolated. Connection was its own kind of armor. He unsaddled his horse, noting how the animal relaxed into familiar routines despite the changes around them. Sometimes survival looked like normal life carried on with purpose. Isaiah filled his water bucket, checked his fences, and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. Dawn found Isaiah at Freeman's barn, addressing 12 men who'd gathered before their regular work began. They stood straight-backed, a mix of ages, but all carrying the same weathered dignity earned through years of working their own land. This isn't about revenge, Isaiah said clearly. It's about staying alive and keeping what's yours. First rule, no shooting unless shot at. Second rule, protect the women and children first. Third rule, never ride alone. Moses Grant, a tall man with gray-streaked hair and hands thick from decades of ranching, nodded slowly. Like the Underground Railroad, safety and system, not spectacle. Exactly, Isaiah agreed. Willie Turner, you served in the war. Show them how to set a proper watch rotation. Turner, younger than Moses, but carrying similar authority, stepped forward. He'd fought at Petersburg and knew the value of disciplined observation. 3 men per shift, 8 hours each. 1 watches north, 1 south, 1 rests, but stays ready. Change positions every 2 hours so your eyes stay fresh. Isaiah supervised as they practiced mounting quickly, loading weapons efficiently, and most importantly, holding position under pressure. He used his Buffalo soldier training, teaching them to control breathing and maintain focus even when frightened. Fear is natural, he explained. Channel it into awareness, not panic. Watch each other's backs. Trust your training. By mid-morning, they had established clear signals. 3 short whistles meant danger approaching. A broken fence post laid flat pointed toward safe houses. Lanterns in specific windows indicated which routes were clear. Moses Grant's wife, Sarah, and other women organized supply caches, medical supplies, ammunition, preserved food. They planned rotating schedules for moving children to protected locations at night, making it seem like normal social visits. We're not running, Moses declared during their noon break. This is our land. We earned it, worked it, made it bloom, but we're not dying for it either. We're outlasting them. Isaiah watched the men practice rifle drills, noting their improving accuracy and discipline. They weren't becoming an army. They were becoming a community that could defend itself. At 2 o'clock, Isaiah rode into town alone, deliberately passing the hotel where Calder held his meetings. The railroad man stood on the porch, discussing something with 2 surveyors. Isaiah stopped his horse directly in front of them. Mr. Calder, he said calmly, might want to check your proposed route again. Seems to cross several legally homesteaded properties. Calder's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. Progress requires some adjustments, Mr. Booker. I'm sure reasonable compensation can be arranged. Reasonable would have been asking first, Isaiah replied. Instead of using terror to drive prices down, he held Calder's gaze until the other man looked away first. "I don't know what you're implying," Calder said stiffly. "But threats won't be tolerated." "Not threatening, just making things clear. Our land isn't for sale, not at any price." Isaiah rode away, leaving Calder visibly unsettled. Word would spread that the black ranchers weren't being intimidated. By late afternoon, Calder and his surveyors had packed their equipment and left town, claiming they needed to reassess the route option. As sunset approached, a stranger arrived at Freeman's ranch where the men were finishing their training. He introduced himself as Edwin Marks, a journalist from Chicago investigating claims of organized land theft across multiple states. "I've heard rumors," Marks said, notebook ready, "about railroad companies using local hate groups to clear valuable property. Been following similar patterns in 3 states." Isaiah studied the journalist carefully. Marks was young, but his eyes were sharp, and he asked detailed questions about property deeds, survey dates, and specific threats. "Federal authorities are starting to take notice," Marks explained. "Too many coincidences between railroad expansion and violence against black landowners. They're sending investigators to examine land records and banking transactions." The men exchanged glances. Federal attention could mean real change or more danger. But, for the first time, they had documentation of the larger conspiracy. As the sun set, Isaiah stood watching his men ride home in pairs, following their practiced security routes. Moses Grant approached, resting a hand on the fence beside him. "Never thought I'd see the day," Moses said quietly. "Us standing together, not just surviving but pushing back, making them back down without blood." Isaiah allowed himself a small smile, his first since Eli's death. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope built on something stronger than violence: community, discipline, and the determination to hold their ground. The evening star appeared as lights began glowing in distant windows, each one marking a home still standing, a family still fighting. Isaiah checked his pocket watch. 7:30 p.m. Time for the night watch to begin their rounds. Dawn light filtered through the windows of Leon Price's small shop, catching dust motes as he arranged dried goods on wooden shelves. His hands trembled slightly, remembering the visit he'd received the night before. 3 men had come after closing, not in robes, but wearing the authority of money and position. They'd been polite, discussing his children's education and his wife's teaching position at the colored school. Then the threats emerged, wrapped in concerned tones. "Be a shame if the school board had to make changes," they'd said. "Or if your store license needed review." Leon straightened a row of coffee tins, trying to steady his nerves. The bell above his door chimed, and Moses Grant entered with Isaiah close behind. "Morning, Leon," Moses called out. "Need some supplies for the watch stations." Leon nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. The usual items?" As he gathered their order, he couldn't help overhearing their conversation. Isaiah spoke in low tones about rotating the guard positions, mentioning specific times and locations. Leon's stomach churned. Exactly the information he'd been pressured to collect. "Everything all right?" Isaiah asked, noticing Leon's distraction. "You seem troubled." "Just tired," Leon replied quickly. "Been busy with inventory." Isaiah studied him for a moment, but didn't press. They paid for their supplies and left, leaving Leon alone with his guilt. An hour later, he wrote everything down with shaking hands: guard schedules, safe house locations, supply caches. He sealed the envelope and left it where instructed, behind the loose brick in the alley wall. By mid-morning, Sheriff Rourke's deputies were unusually active, riding past black-owned properties with careful attention. Leon watched from his shop window, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Isaiah was checking fence lines on his property when the sheriff's posse arrived. 6 deputies spread out in a half-circle while Rourke approached on horseback, warrant in hand. "Isaiah Booker," Rourke called out, his voice carrying across the field. "You're under arrest for inciting unrest and organizing unlawful assemblies." Isaiah set down his tools slowly. "Interesting charges, Sheriff. Especially since gathering on our own land isn't unlawful." "Armed gatherings are," Rourke countered. "We have witness testimony about unauthorized militia activities." "Self-defense isn't militia activity," Isaiah said calmly. "But you know that. Don't make this difficult, Booker. Come peaceful-like, and we'll sort it proper through the courts." Isaiah looked around, noting the deputies' hands on their weapons. He'd expected this eventually, the system using its own rules to restore control. Fighting now would only give them excuse for violence. "I'll come," he said, "but my men will keep watching their land." Rourke nodded stiffly. "Long as they stay peaceful. Won't be any trouble." They rode into town, Isaiah's hands bound but his back straight. People stopped to watch, whites triumphant, blacks fearful but holding their ground. Leon Price stood in his doorway, unable to meet Isaiah's eyes as they passed. At the jail, they took Isaiah's gun belt, boots, and pocket watch. The cell was small, iron bars recently reinforced. Through the window he could see the street filling with celebrating whites, their victory shouts mixing with guitar music from the saloon. "Ain't personal," Deputy Pike said as he locked the cell. "Just maintaining order." "Order for who?" Isaiah asked quietly. Pike didn't answer, just walked away. Outside, the celebrating grew louder. Someone started singing about proper justice coming soon. Isaiah sat on the narrow bunk, listening to the noise. He'd known jail was likely, had prepared his men for it, but the betrayal that led here still stung. He recognized Leon's handwriting on the arrest warrant's witness statement. Night fell, but the crowd outside stayed. Torches appeared, casting dancing shadows through the cell window. Isaiah could smell whiskey on the wind, hear the growing boldness in their voices. "String him up!" someone shouted, followed by agreeing cheers. But Isaiah noticed something else, paired riders moving quietly past the jail's back wall. His men, maintaining their watch rotations despite his arrest. He recognized Willie Turner's whistle signal, 3 short notes meaning danger watched but contained. The cell was cold, but Isaiah allowed himself a small smile. They'd learned well. The system could jail one man, but couldn't stop what he'd built. The watchfires would keep burning. The community would keep standing. Through his window, Isaiah saw Leon Price hurrying through the shadows, heading home with hunched shoulders, the weight of betrayal visible in every step. Behind him, the celebrations grew rowdier, torchlight painting the street in shades of fire and darkness. Isaiah leaned back against the cell wall, counting the hours until dawn. The night would be long, but his men would keep their posts. Whatever came next, that much was certain. The jail cell grew colder as dawn approached. Isaiah sat on the hard bunk, back straight against the wall, watching shadows retreat from the rising sun. He hadn't slept. No point wasting these quiet hours on rest when there was thinking to be done. He could hear the town stirring outside, wagons creaking, horses stamping, early workers heading to their jobs. Normal sounds that felt strange after everything that had happened. The celebrating crowds had finally dispersed around midnight, leaving behind broken bottles and trampled dirt. Isaiah ran his fingers over the rough wood of the bunk. No regrets lived in his mind. Not for the 30 men he'd killed, not for staying to protect the land afterward. Each choice had been necessary, each death earned through years of terror and injustice. The only regret was not seeing the bigger picture sooner, not understanding how deep the roots of power went. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Deputy Pike appeared with a tin cup of water and hard biscuit. "Breakfast," he mumbled, sliding them through the bars. Isaiah didn't move to take them. "Any word on when the judge arrives?" "Soon enough." Pike wouldn't meet his eyes. "Got visitors coming at 8. "Your sister." The deputy retreated quickly, keys jingling at his belt. Isaiah waited until the footsteps faded before taking small sips of the water. The biscuit he left untouched. No sense risking poison, even if it seemed unlikely. Sarah arrived precisely at 8, escorted by 2 deputies who kept their distance but watched closely. She wore her best dress, the dark blue one saved for church, and carried herself with the quiet dignity that had helped her survive losing both husband and son. "Brother," she said softly, standing before the cell, "you look tired." "Just thinking," Isaiah replied. "What news?" Sarah glanced at the deputies, then back to Isaiah. "The federal men left yesterday. Mr. Marks, too, packed up sudden-like and caught the morning train. Nobody's saying why, but—" She let the words trail off meaningfully. Isaiah nodded. He'd expected as much. Systems protected themselves, and this one reached higher than he'd imagined. "What else?" "People are scared," Sarah continued. "Our people especially. Some talking about leaving, but most staying put. The watch posts are still manned, like you taught them. Good. They'll need that strength." Isaiah stood and moved closer to the bars, lowering his voice. "I need you to do something for me, sister." Sarah stepped nearer, head bowed as if in prayer. The deputies shifted, but didn't intervene. "There's a leather ledger hidden under the loose floorboard by my bed," Isaiah whispered. "Get it today. Inside you'll find names, dates, business records, everything connecting the railroad deal to Eli's murder. Keep it safe until the right time comes. When will that be? You'll know, when they can't hurt us anymore for telling the truth." He paused, choosing words carefully. "If anything happens to me, make sure those papers reach bigger papers up north. Chicago, New York, places where money talks louder than color." Sarah's hands gripped her skirts tightly. "They're saying, there's talk of—" "I know what they're saying." Isaiah's voice remained steady. "That's why the ledger needs to be safe. Truth outlasts fear, if you protect it right." They spoke a while longer about practical matters, property arrangements, cattle sales, which families could be trusted. Sarah memorized it all without writing anything down. Finally, the deputies signaled time was up. "Keep faith," Isaiah told her as she turned to leave. "Not in justice, maybe, but in consequence. Everything pays its price, eventually." Sarah nodded once, straight-backed and dry-eyed, then walked away. Her footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving Isaiah alone with the growing heat of the day. The hours passed slowly. Isaiah heard whispered conversations between deputies, caught fragments about tonight and crowd control. Around sunset, Pike brought another meal, beans and cornbread this time. Still, Isaiah didn't eat. Instead, he sat in the deepening darkness, listening to the town's evening sounds. Somewhere, a guitar played softly. Horses nickered in their stalls. Normal sounds, peaceful almost, except for the undercurrent of tension in the air. Isaiah closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to think. He remembered Eli's smile, Sarah's quiet strength, the way hope had started growing in people's eyes before today. Those memories were worth whatever came next. Night settled fully over the jail. Isaiah remained still, breathing steady, mind clear. There would be no rescue attempt. He'd made sure his men understood that. Their job was to protect the land and each other. His job now was to face whatever morning brought with the same dignity he'd tried to live by. The hours crept past midnight. Isaiah kept his eyes closed, conserving strength. Whatever happened, he would meet it standing. The morning sun cast long shadows across Red Willow's dusty main street as Sarah Booker hurried between buildings, a leather ledger pressed tight against her chest. She moved with purpose, knowing each minute counted now. Moses Grant's general store wasn't open yet, but a light burned inside. Sarah knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more, the signal they'd arranged. The door opened just enough for her to slip through. Inside, faces turned toward her in the dim lamplight. Moses Grant himself, Willie Turner, Reverend Marcus Johnson from the Black Church. And Edwin Marks, the journalist who hadn't fled after all. He'd just gone into hiding, working from a secret room above the store. "I have it," Sarah said, placing the ledger on the counter. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Everything Isaiah recorded. Every name, every meeting, every dollar changing hands. Marks leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "May I?" Sarah nodded. The journalist began reading, his expression growing grimmer with each page. The others crowded around, speaking in hushed tones. "Look here!" Marks pointed to a detailed entry. "Railroad purchase agreements dated 3 months before Eli's murder, signed by Judge Finch himself, promising to clear certain obstacles from the proposed route. And here," Willie Turner added, "list of payments to known Klan members, dated regular as clockwork, matching up perfect with nights they rode." Moses Grant's weathered face hardened. "Got receipts, too. Lumber yard bills for crosses, stable rental fees for extra horses. They weren't even trying to hide it, because they never thought anyone would dare look," Reverend Johnson said quietly. "Or live to tell if they did." Sarah watched them piece it together, her brother's methodical documentation revealing the machinery of terror that had ruled their lives. Every transaction, every connection carefully noted in Isaiah's precise handwriting. "I can have this wired to Chicago by noon," Marks said, already copying names into his notebook. "New York by evening. Papers I trust, editors who owe me favors." "What about closer?" Moses asked. "State papers that might actually change things here?" "Already arranged," Marks replied. "Got runners waiting to carry copies to Austin, Dallas, Houston. Papers there are hungry for anything that might embarrass the railroad barons. Bad publicity costs money." They worked quickly, making multiple copies, distributing them through trusted networks built over generations of survival. By mid-morning, the first telegraphs were flying across wires. By noon, runners were heading out on fast horses, carrying sealed packets to newspaper offices across Texas. Sarah stood at the store window, watching the town's normal activity with new eyes. Sheriff Rourke passed by on his usual rounds, tipping his hat to white ladies, ignoring black faces. He had no idea what was coming. The first ripples hit around 2 o'clock. A telegram arrived for Judge Finch, who read it on the courthouse steps and turned pale. He hurried to the sheriff's office, several prominent businessmen close behind. By 4, more telegrams were arriving. Railroad officials, bank representatives, even the state capitol. Sarah could see people gathering in small groups, voices low and worried. The sheriff's office door opened and closed repeatedly as men rushed in and out. "It's working," Marks said, joining her at the window. "Railroad companies hate scandal more than anything, especially with new investors coming down from Chicago next week." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "Look there," Marks pointed, as another telegram boy ran toward the jail. "That'll be the order now. They can't risk making your brother a martyr, not with these papers spreading." Every death he caused had a reason, had a money trail leading right to their doors. They'll have to let him go quiet, hope it all blows over. Inside the sheriff's office, Calvin Rourke stared at the telegram in his trembling hands. Railroad letterhead at the top, direct orders below. "Release prisoner immediately. No charges, no statements. Consider matter closed." Rourke collapsed into his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. Through his window, he could see more telegram boys arriving, more worried faces hurrying past. The careful structure of power he'd served was cracking, all because of one man's detailed accounting. He reached for his keys with shaking fingers. Sometimes surrender was the only way to survive. Sometimes the best you could do was hope people forgot quickly enough. The sun was setting as Rourke walked toward the jail cells, keys jingling at his belt. Behind him, more telegrams arrived. Before him, Isaiah Booker waited, unknowing but unafraid. Rourke's steps echoed in the corridor. He'd have to choose his words carefully, have to make this look natural, unremarkable, had to find a way to release a killer without admitting why. The key scraped in the lock just as another telegram boy's voice rang out in the street. "Urgent message for Sheriff Rourke!" The iron door creaked open as dusk painted Red Willow's sky in shades of purple and orange. Sheriff Rourke stood back, not meeting Isaiah's eyes. "You're free to go," he mumbled, his usual authority replaced by uncomfortable necessity. "No charges." Isaiah rose slowly from the wooden bench, his movements deliberate and calm. He didn't ask why or thank the sheriff. Both men knew this wasn't mercy. It was surrender. Outside, the street had grown quiet. Windows were dark in several prominent homes, doors locked tight against the growing darkness. A wagon loaded with trunks and furniture rattled past, heading east. Isaiah recognized the driver as one of Judge Finch's associates, his face tight with barely contained panic. "3 more families left this afternoon," a familiar voice said softly. Sarah stepped out from the shadow of the general store, her eyes bright with contained satisfaction. Judge Finch himself was seen riding out just before sunset. Didn't even wait to pack properly. Isaiah nodded, taking in the changed atmosphere. Fear still hung in the air, but it had shifted ownership. The oppressors were running from their own reflections, scattered by nothing more dangerous than truth written in black ink. "The railroad men?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Gone," Sarah confirmed. "Mr. Calder received a telegram from his superiors this morning. All land negotiations are suspended pending investigation. They're trying to distance themselves from the whole mess." They walked together through the cooling evening air, past the saloon where nervous white faces peered out through unwashed windows. A group of black children played openly in the street, their laughter carrying no trace of the usual careful restraint. "Moses Grant has copies of everything," Sarah continued as they turned toward home. "The ledger's been duplicated, distributed. Even if they burn every newspaper, the evidence won't disappear." "Good," Isaiah said simply. He'd known the ledger was more powerful than any weapon when he'd started recording names and dates. Violence might break bodies, but exposed secrets shattered foundations. They passed the cottonwood tree where Eli had died. Someone had cut down the rope, but the scar in the bark remained, a permanent reminder that some debts could never be fully paid. At the Booker house, Sarah prepared a simple meal, while Isaiah washed away the jail's grime. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from understanding too deep for words. "Willie Turner says they're forming a landowners association," Sarah mentioned as she cleared the plates. "Legal papers drawn up, armed men ready to protect what's theirs. Moses Grant's brother-in-law is a lawyer in Austin. He's helping make everything official." Isaiah absorbed this news without comment. The community was building something stronger than revenge, legitimate power backed by law and unity. "The newspaper man, Marks, he's staying," Sarah added. "Says there's more stories need telling. Says people up north are starting to pay attention." Through the window, they could see lights burning in black homes across town. No more hiding lamps, no more pretending to sleep early. Small freedoms, but significant ones. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Sarah asked finally, though she already knew the answer. "At dawn," Isaiah confirmed. "My work here is finished." Sarah didn't argue. She understood that myths couldn't live among ordinary people. Isaiah had become something larger than himself, a story that would work better from a distance. They spent the rest of the evening sorting through Isaiah's few possessions. Most would stay with Sarah. He would travel light, carrying only what a wandering cowboy might need. As the night deepened, more wagons rolled out of town. The remaining Klan sympathizers were choosing exile over exposure. By morning, power in Red Willow would have shifted completely, not through force, but through the simple weight of unveiled truth. Sarah insisted Isaiah take her bed, while she slept in Eli's old room. But Isaiah spent most of the night in a rocking chair by the window, watching the stars wheel overhead and the occasional lantern light moving through town. The first gray hint of dawn found him already in the barn, checking his saddle and preparing his horse. The animal was well rested, ready for a long journey. Isaiah worked methodically, each motion precise and purposeful, just as he approached everything in life. He could hear Sarah in the house, making coffee and breakfast, though they both knew he wouldn't stay to eat. Some partings needed to be clean, quick, like pulling a bandage from a healing wound. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon as Isaiah tightened the last strap on his saddle. Morning birds were just beginning their songs, and a cool breeze carried the promise of another hot Texas day. Sarah stood on the porch as Isaiah mounted his horse, her silence saying more than words could manage. The first rays of sunlight caught the dust rising from the yard, turning it to floating gold. A small group of children had gathered at the edge of the Booker property, drawn by the mystical power that makes young ones sense important moments. They watched with wide eyes as Isaiah adjusted his hat and gathered the reins. "Uncle Isaiah," called one small voice, young Marcus Turner, Willie's boy. "You coming back?" Isaiah turned in his saddle, studying the children's faces. Some were barely old enough to understand what had happened these past weeks, but they'd remember. They'd tell their own children someday. "Stay strong," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. The horse's hooves kicked up small clouds as Isaiah guided it toward the main road. More people emerged from their homes to watch. Black families standing proud on their porches, white faces peeking nervously through curtains. The morning air hummed with unspoken change. Moses Grant stood at the crossroads, straight-backed and dignified. He raised a hand as Isaiah passed, a gesture of respect between equals. Behind him, several other black landowners had gathered, their faces showing the quiet determination of men who knew their strength. Isaiah rode past the church, where Reverend Hale had once preached hatred behind closed doors. The building stood empty now, its windows dark. A for sale sign swayed in the morning breeze. Already, there was talk of the black congregation buying it, turning poison into medicine. The schoolhouse had new faces in its windows, black children sitting alongside the few remaining white students whose parents had chosen community over hatred. The teacher, a young woman from up north, nodded as Isaiah passed. Change wouldn't come easy, but it would come. Near the edge of town, Isaiah passed the printing office where Edwin Marks was already at work, his press clattering with purpose. Pages covered in truth would spread beyond Red Willow's borders, carrying stories that needed telling. The journalist raised his coffee cup in salute. The sheriff's office was conspicuously quiet, its door closed. Through the window, Isaiah glimpsed Rourke at his desk, staring at papers that would never quite add up the way they used to. The law would have to learn new paths, find different hands to serve. As the buildings thinned out, Isaiah passed Willie Turner's newly expanded ranch. Armed men patrolled its borders openly, their rifles clean and visible. Not threatening, just prepared. They touched their hats as Isaiah rode by, acknowledgement passing between protectors. The morning sun climbed higher as Isaiah reached the county line. He paused there, looking back at the town that would never be the same. Red Willow was changing, not into paradise, but into something closer to justice. The clan's power had been broken not just by violence, but by the courage of people standing together in the light. Years would pass, and travelers would bring stories. How Red Willow's black landowners prospered, how their children went to school without fear, how the night riders never regained their hold. The county would become known as a place where justice had been rewritten, not by law, but by consequence. Some would tell of a dark-skinned cowboy who appeared in other troubled towns, where oppression wore different masks but carried the same stench. These stories would grow like smoke signals across Texas, warnings to some and hope to others. Isaiah's name would be whispered in late-night conversations, passed between those who needed to believe in more than patience. But that morning, Isaiah didn't know these things. He knew only that his part in Red Willow's story was complete. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks, turning east toward the rising sun. The horizon stretched wide and empty before him, promising new trails and untold challenges. Behind him, the children watched until his figure grew small against the morning sky. They would remember this moment, how a legend rode away, but left them something stronger than myths, the knowledge that justice, once claimed, could be held. The dust settled slowly in Isaiah's wake. Red Willow stirred to life under the climbing sun, its people moving into a day that felt somehow cleaner, clearer. The town clock struck 7, its chimes carrying across changed streets, where fear had found new owners and hope wore unfamiliar faces. Isaiah's horse picked up speed as the road curved around a distant hill. For a moment, his silhouette stood sharp against the bright sky. Then he was gone, leaving Red Willow to write its own next chapter. The legend rode on, unfinished but unbound, while behind him justice settled into new patterns like soil after a cleansing rain. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.